Hi, my name is Toni Pacini. I'm an author, and I am very honored and pleased to say that I'm a student at College of Southern Nevada, where I have been studying for the last few years, mainly under one professor. As often as I can, I take her classes, Professor Yelena Bailey Kirby, who I believe is one of the finest professors and teachers that any college could ever anticipate having. Now, this is not a commercial for Professor Bailey Kirby. This is a project that I'm doing in her English 275 class. I have never made a personal video, and it's quite a challenge for me, but I'm pleased to be doing it on a subject that is near and dear my heart, mental illness. We were to choose one of the stories that we studied this semester, and I chose Silver Water, a story by Amy Bloom, about one family struggle with mental illness and the institutions around it. In the story, the one thing that became most clear to me, and I've had personal experience with, is that mental illness, it may only seem to be the problem of one individual in a group or in a family, but it's a family affair. It's a family disorder. You cannot live with mental illness in your home and not have it affect you. Now, in Silver Water, the title comes from the girl Rose, the daughter who later has problems and eventually succumbs to her mental problems. Rose is beautiful, blonde, just everything a young girl would hope to be in a society like we live in. Uh, Intelligent, articulate. Her father is a psychiatrist. Her mother is a musician, rather eccentric but fantastic. And she has a younger sister that adores her. And the title comes from the fact that she has a voice that's like liquid silver, like silver water. And her sister holds on to that throughout the tale. The mother is Galen, and she is a musician, and she has always been the strength, the strong one, which is a little bit of a lesson in itself. That just because the professional psychiatrist is a member of the family, it doesn't necessarily mean that he or she is the person that can most easily deal with mental disorders and problems, not with your own family. Now, David, he is the kind psychiatrist, and he adores Galen, his wife, and his children. They have a beautiful home, and it's near the water, and there's woods, and it just kind of shatters that nature nurture thing a little bit too, in that sometimes you do everything you can, and what is, and sometimes it just happens. Now, Violet, she's 2 years younger than her sister Rose, and she will always be her number one supporter throughout the story, and uh, and she's with her all the way. She stands by her. But like I said, the disease is a family disease, so Violet is so obsessed with Rose's mental illness that, in a sense, she's living it. She is living it. The whole family's living it. But Rose, blonde, beautiful, intelligent, she was just a beautiful young woman until 15 years old. And that's when she had her first break. An ironic part of what she chose to do around that break is a message that she had received, her and Violet, when they were young, when they were little girls. Their mother would sing them a lullaby, a sherbet lullaby, which was about the woods and the water calling to the little girl to go to sleep. So when she had her first break, that's where her mother would find her. It would be in the woods, asleep, sometimes like in the briars and the brangles, and her mom would, Galen would, you know, get in there and somehow pull her out of it and take her home and clean her up and put her to bed. And it was the mother that finally was able to break through the family denial and go to her husband, the psychiatrist, and say, she's coming undone. She actually is going what is called crazy. And no amount of my telling her I love you and mothering her is going to fix this. Uh, he wanted to be in denial about it. He was a little cranky at first, and he realized that she was absolutely right, and they had to do something. And he did try, but he was too close to it. And I will add that from personal experience, and I have my share, that oftentimes it seems to me, and I've read that tends to be the case, I suppose kind of like a police officer oftentimes goes into the business because someone robbed a family member or hurt them or killed someone that they cared about or saw some violence that they never wanted to occur again, so they become a police officer. Well, oftentimes people that work in mental illness come from a background where they've experienced mental illness, either themselves sometimes and feel that and oftentimes do overcome it, or in their families or in close proximity. And they decide when they're older that they want to try and help people that are going through that because it's such a darkness that seems to have no end at times. And so it is a very admirable field to go into. But the issue is that oftentimes, because these individuals are so close to the mental illness themselves, it can also overwhelm them and chew them up after a few years. I've always kind of thought maybe you should rotate in and out of that business on occasion. So it turned out to be Rosa's mom, Galen, that had to do all of the stepping up. Her husband even brought in his colleagues, but that just wasn't what she needed at the time. Um, so they did attempt to treat her at home, but then it was time to take her to the hospitals. One of the things that they encountered, which is common today, um, it was more common in the past, but I know that it is still true today, that just like there are good health spas and apartment complexes, there's also bad ones. Unfortunately, in the area of mental health, that is just any kind of health care facility you would hope would be 100%, but they often aren't. But if you have good advocates, especially good family advocates, it can make all the difference in the world. And it did for Rose. She was very, very fortunate young woman in that her mother at one point took her to this one facility, her mother and father, and walked in, and the place was just stark. There weren't even any pictures, and the patients had on matching slippers with the hospital logo on it. And Rosa's father was apologizing to his colleagues as her mother was heading her out the door, which I applauded. Coming from a life where I've seen too many people not protected that should have been, I think that the strongest and finest character in this book to me is Galen. And later, when I talk about Amy Bloom, who wrote the book, I will tie together how I see a little of that in her character. And I believe that's why this character came so easily for her to create. So having family and advocates is extremely important. Okay, there's the conflict. I mean, it's obvious the conflict is in the whole plot is what happens to a family when you come up against this huge issue. One of your beloved family members all of a sudden are not okay and they're in danger and they may even be endangering you. What can you do about it? That is the conflict. Something has to be done. And the mother is the one who has made the decision that she definitely is going to get out there, find out what it is that can be done, and get it done. So they have tried different places, and they've been through a lot of bad family therapist. One therapist was so condescending. He was speaking to them when their first visit in like third person, like Rose wasn't even there, and she started doing what she did when she felt that she was not being respected, and she didn't have a lot of tools, so she did what worked. And one of the things would be for her to start playing with her own breast. She started doing this, and the family started to laugh because it's her usual MO. She's not hurting anyone. And the doctor, instead of even addressing it to her, was like he wondered why would people act as if this is okay. And when he didn't get the response he wanted, he asked Violet, Rosa's sister, for why she thought they were acting that way. And she said, well, it may be because you're talking to her like she's, in third person. And the family, again, were like, right on, well said. I just adored this family. And then comes the turning point. And even in the saddest stories, thank goodness that oftentimes there is at least one turning point. And this turning point was a huge man huge man wore black cowboy boots, loved his beer and his tacos, and his name was Dr. Thorne. And the day that he walked into the room, Rose immediately was like, "Yay-hoo!" She called him Doctor. Oh, here's Doctor Big Nut or something, and he immediately had a sense of humor and turned it around on her and called her Little Nut and called the mother a walnut because they're the hardest nut, and the sister who was clearly so not to be messed with, nobody's nut. And he just straight away stepped into a role that the family desperately needed. And he gave them, because of his care of her, 5 years. He gave her 5 years. He gave Rose 5 years of probably the best part of her life she had had since she was 15. Um, During that time, he managed to get her into a halfway house. People there loved and respected him, so he managed to keep her in, even when she started having sex with everyone that would consider doing so. Um, and he understood that, though. There was not condemnation of that either. Um, the doctor, Dr. Thorne, obviously used food to deal with his issues. He was quite obese. And Rose had gone from a thin young girl to extremely obese herself because she had been using food. And then she tried using sex, anything to try and make you feel better. And here's that irony again. She has the best psychiatrist, therapist she's ever had, and yet he's got his issues too. He can't control his need to fill that hole within himself. And all she's trying to do with the sex, touching her breast, appalling people, and overeating is to fill that hole. And we all at times feel it, and we always have different ways to try and fill it up. That having been said, because of him, she moved into the halfway house. Because of his kindness and truthfulness with her, she actually stopped using sex. She joined a choir, an all-black choir, and they were thrilled to have her. Her voice was incredible. And who knows what may have happened in Rosa's life. But she had been in his care for 5 years, and the doctor succumbed to his own mental illness. Didn't intend to, but you could say ate himself to death. He choked to death in his office. I believe it was on a taco. And for the first part, Rose did pretty well. She hung on there for a little while, uh, kept going to and singing, but as it became more real to her, she became somewhat violent, or just acted out and pushed somebody down the stairs at the halfway house. Fortunately, they were okay, but they had to have her move home. The family went through some really bad times for several weeks there because the insurance that they had, which made no sense at all, required that she be symptom free for 45 days before she could go into a new facility. And like the sister Violet said, why would they require that? She has been free of symptoms for 45 minutes and so long. And it was just one of those insurance company games that they play with people's lives. She made it at home, if I'm not mistaken, 27 days. During that time, things got progressively worse. Violet tried to be there as much as she could. Right toward the end, her mother actually told her to take some time for herself, and she took a week. And it was hard for her not to call or go see what was going on. When she did show up, that one day, a week later, mother had been down to the water with Rose, which they did frequently. And when they came back, there was a situation in the kitchen, and Rose just lost it and started banging her head on the floor. When her mom tried to stop her, she threw her off of her against the refrigerator. Her mom, Galen, asked Violet, please, and Violet threw herself underneath her large sister so that her head would hit her on her stomach instead of the floor. And fortunately, that woke Rose up enough, and she realized that, oh my, I'm so sorry, Mom. Violet, I'm so sorry. What have I done? And she ran to her room. With this commotion got the father in there, and he came running in, and he was worried sick. And Violet had rarely ever lied, but I understood why she did when asked what had happened. Instead of saying that her sister had violently thrown her mother against the refrigerator, She just made it feel like it was just a scuffle, sound like, that it was accidental, that nothing violent happened. He and uh, Galen got Rose to bed that night, and Violet spent the night. And it was about 3 o'clock or so in the morning that she woke to go get another blanket, Violet, and decided to look in on Rose, and she wasn't there. So she got dressed and went outside, and she's walking toward the woods where Rose has been known to go, and she's calling for her, and she almost fell over her. She was on the ground, and she sat with her and watched the stars go away and the sun come up while she passed away. The bottle of pills was still beside her, and she was pretty incoherent when she found her, but she stayed with her. I thought that was the most loving thing I've ever read. Some people would say, why didn't you run and get an ambulance? But for what? Rose was doing the only thing she knew how to do to stop the pain. And she wasn't just doing it for her. She was doing it for all of her family and for everyone she loved. It was the most uh, brave act a woman in her position could commit. She was maybe 30 years old. Her sister sat with her, and when morning came, she got up and she started walking toward the house, and the mother was on the porch looking toward them, knowing what had happened. And she was afraid, Violet was afraid, actually, that the mother would blame her or punish her that, why'd you let her die? And instead, she embraced her and talked about what fine, strong women. That's not, I'm paraphrasing here. I have notes, but I don't choose to use them. The story was very touching and stuck with me, and I'd rather discuss it as a storyteller, which is what I am, and clearly what Amy Bloom is about. So the mother, once again, not the father. Remember that's another piece of the irony. So the mother headed into the woods and went to her daughter. She came back, did things that needed to be done, and then the father himself took over, made the phone calls to people, picked a casket, and made the arrangements. And the mother, for the first time in years, went to bed. When Rose passed, she could finally rest. She was the sort of stoic woman that would never have laid down as long as her child needed her. But at that point, she must have been completely spent. The last few weeks, the husband had even told Violet that the mother rarely slept because Rose barely slept. So she slept until her daughter's funeral. Powerful, powerful story. Amy Bloom, I found out in looking up her history, so to speak, and getting a little information about her. Pretty fascinating woman, has written a variety of things. Um, but she studied psychology herself, if I'm not mistaken. If I will look at my notes here for just a moment, that she studied to be a psychotherapist. So her understanding and awareness of a lot of these issues I felt came about because of that. And in 2013, she published a children's picture book. And I don't know why that uh, touched me so much, except she did seem to have such a grasp of what children and what people needed to hear about young people, about children, and what children needed to hear. But I will quote where she says what she felt about doing that children's book. She said, writing for adults does not afford me the opportunity of illustrations featuring a brave little sweet potato surviving thunderstorms and the sneers of condescending veggies. I mean, I just felt like that said a lot about who she is and how she sees children, that they're pretty powerful, and they're as powerful as we make them if we give them power. The last comment I'll make about Amy Bloom is that I was pleased to find out when she was asked if there was any book that she wishes someone else would write. This is what she had to say, and I'll paraphrase a bit, but she wishes that someone would write a clear and very defined, definitive, persuasive book that articulates exactly why women's reproductive rights are so important in America, to this country, on both moral and legal grounds. And when she said, when I say clearly and persuasively, I mean that after reading this wonderful book, All opposition to women's reproductive rights would evaporate like morning mist. I honor and applaud her for that. I too would love to know why and who decided that what a woman does with her body is anyone's business except for that woman. The issues that have been brought up and the shame that's been put on people in our country have just been so demoralizing. It's like a misunderstanding of mental health and mental illness. It's one of the cruelest things that have happened to women and families, in my opinion, in our society. In conclusion, I will say that the setting, bringing in the woods, that really showed when she went there, when she was first falling apart and didn't know what was happening to her, she would cradle herself in the woods and the bushes, and that was so depictive of her isolation. But that song, the child's song that mother had given to comfort her, I'm sure lying there in the woods, I believe, that's what she was hearing. She was in the woods called her, and she could go there and go to sleep and stop the voices. Throughout the entire book, it showed us the strengths and the weaknesses of all people. We all have our holes, and we all fill them different ways. The father was devastated that he couldn't help his daughter, but he did volunteer to help at the halfway house and did everything he could. He's a good man, but that wasn't his long suit. When she disappeared into the woods to fall apart, he didn't go get her. His wife did. She was the strong one. That was her long suit. When she died in the woods, the mother and the daughter, the sister went to her. The father could not. But he was the one that made the arrangements. He stayed strong. He called family members. He picked the casket. They needed each other. There had to be one with this ability and one with that ability. And in our society, where one has a weakness, another has a strength. It's not just a family, it's also our society, our communities, and our world. But bottom line, and I'll close with this, if there's mental illness in the family, it's not that one individual who's experiencing mental illness. It is a family affair. Thank you.